question is for Katy. So I was curious how you would approach conversation. How you would approach a conversation with someone who has transphobic views that are rooted in religious views or other views that you might not be prepared to unravel at that point in time, right? Where do you sort of begin?
Yeah, it's very difficult. I think sometimes when someone is like LGBT phobic or specifically transphobic, and there's some kind of grounding in religion, you don't want your conversation of stop treating this person differently to end up in does God exist? Because it's a whole huge mess to unravel. I think it depends what religion, but generally, to an extent here, it's a bit easier for trans people than with talking about gay rights, is that some religions, like Christianity, in the holy text, it says some kind of comment about gay people. For example, in Christianity, again, there is just no comment on trans people. And I think that before, when I've had success, I've said to a religious person who has been perhaps of an Abrahamic religion, I'll say, your holy text doesn't mention trans people. It's just not in there. There's no guidance on it at all. You can do the generic like love angle, like, you know, there are things in your text to say love other people as they are. Yeah. And then my final point would be that God, like what I usually say to people, like as an atheist, but like posing to them is, you know, God creates everyone with their own challenges, and most religious people accept that. There are some people who have some challenges and some people have some others, but God creates you who you are. And God has created, for example, me. God created me as a trans woman, and he has given me the challenge of transitioning. And it's an emotional challenge. It's a spiritual challenge. It's all the challenges. And I think that often people have this kind of idea that like, oh, God doesn't make mistakes. And like, I'm not saying God makes mistakes. I'm saying God has chosen this for me. And it's just a normal path. And you know, he's given me this spirit or this soul or whatever they believe in. And I think that often when people realize there's no strict rule against it, and there's some kind of rationalization for it, and then the natural just inclination to be nice to people. Most people are just nice. I think it benefits once they've met a trans person as well. Yeah, they're less likely to gut react. Religion says no.
Yeah, what I add is, you know, Katy did mention that, again, the Bible doesn't specifically say anything about trans people. There are some people who will say that there are references to it. And there's a couple of examples that come to mind where it doesn't exclusively fall into that category. One of them is an Old Testament passage, specifically, I believe it's in Leviticus, that talks about basically saying man can't wear kind of women's clothing. And I think vice versa too as well. I can't think of it specifically, but that's not saying anything about trans people. That's saying someone identifying as one can't wear the clothing of identifying as another. But if you're a trans woman, you already identify as the other, you know, gender. So that doesn't.
When I've encountered people who have said this to me before, and I've managed to win them over. Pretty much, I mean, it is a bit of just like a linguistic dodge in a sense, but it's kind of the level you're dealing with it at. It says here, men can't wear women's clothes, and be like, but I'm not a man.
Yeah, exactly.
Problem solved. I mean, like, there are people, they may, you know, if they've got a gut reaction, if it's a bit more deep rooted than just their religion, then they'll come up with some other arguments, and you can have a non-religious argument. But if they're having a religious argument,
the pushback that I normally hear is, and it's absolutely horrible, and I hate to repeat it, is they tend to push back with, oh, well, it's just a mental disorder or something along those lines, and I don't have have enough armament to really fight back against, you know, something that unfounded.
You asked the right person.
You should follow me on Twitter.
Exactly.
This is a classic. There's a few classic arguments. One is it's a mental illness. And there's a few layers to this. Firstly, it's not a mental illness. If you talk to any experts, if you ask any of the like major organizations like WPATH, World something transgender, I don't know, the World Health Organization, the UK's NHS, like all of the major health organizations just say it's not a mental illness. It's not a mental illness to be trans. And then the next thing is, if it was a mental illness, that doesn't mean that it's insanity. Like often people use mental illness and insanity. Like when I say insanity, I mean like unaware of the surroundings, saying nonsense. Like, you know, the stereotype. Yeah. They often use them interchangeably, but like arachnophobia is like a mental illness, and like, you know, depression is a mental illness. And
yeah, that doesn't mean it's not real.
It doesn't mean you shouldn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you should get treatment. People with mental illnesses deserve treatment.
And it doesn't mean that you should discriminate against someone for it.
It doesn't mean they should be discriminated. It doesn't mean you shouldn't believe them as well. Like a depressed person is still able to do their job. They're still able to have friends. They're still able to enjoy their life in a lot of cases. There's nothing about them which makes them an irrational, unreasonable, unbelievable person. It's just they have a condition. So I think there's two parts. One, I always lead with, it's just not a mental illness. That's factually false. There's a really good, you know, the Principal Skinner meme, like, maybe everyone else is wrong. Actually, it's me. There's a good one for if you Google that, it's like this huge list. It's the list of all the health organizations which say being trans isn't a mental illness, and it's like all of them. Or maybe I'm wrong.
It's
just a misconception.
If being transgender is a mental illness, then me presenting as a man would also be a mental illness. You see what I'm saying? Like,
I think we all agree that being a cis man is a mental illness.
Okay, sure. Yeah, sure. Like, but you know, the idea is just like how much of this, and people really don't make the distinction between social constructs and you know, everything else. But and also, okay, this is a side note to a side note. Just because something's a social construct doesn't mean it's not real either. Like, money is fucking real, okay? Like, we use that shit every day, but it's also like not real at the same time. Like, it's kind of has these qualities to it that make it, you know, obviously the social construct, this idea that I hand you this paper and that's worth something to you, you know, that even though, the paper itself isn't going to do anything, but it's meaningful to you in some way. And so the way that I was just gonna say, the way that we present ourselves as our genders is meaningful to us in some sort of way. That's why we do make these distinctions, but it's just not as tangible as, you know, some other things we might point to.
The only reason to classify something like as a mental illness really is to provide some kind of treatment. Like there are all kinds of bodily conditions that you can have. Like if you graze your finger, you don't need to call it a medical condition because you don't really need any treatment. Whereas if you break your hand, like smash it, then it's a condition and it's worth labeling because we know things with this label benefit from this treatment. It's part of the like diagnosis process. And it doesn't make any sense to call this thing a mental illness because it doesn't benefit from these types of treatments. It does make sense to call these things, but a mental illness because it does benefit from these treatments. But that doesn't mean that it then means you're incapable of doing your job or incapable of knowing who you are. Yeah,
for sure.
It like it is a social construct. It's a meaningful social construct. But if you ever need to do I'm gonna slightly self-plug here. If you ever need to do like some kind of standard trans argument, like hit me up on Twitter. DMs are open. Lots of these are just like, you know, every single day. Someone tells me being trans is a mental illness like once every 6 hours. So
is that helpful, Kyle?
I'm so sorry.
No, it's fine.
Yeah,
like
that was super helpful. Thank you.
It's like someone telling me that the world is flat every 6 hours. I'm like, okay, here we go again. No, if it's like, you know, it's just incorrect. And that's people don't know.
Yeah, having to deal with the bullshit, it takes orders of magnitude more patience than being able to produce it, you know?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It's an undue burden on Katy that she has to explain herself to people as well. I think that's bullshit too, which is why I think it's good for people like you and me, Kyle, who can talk about this as well. And stuff. We can be good allies to folks, and we can kind of and point to the right people when we need to, when something is outside of our scope. So, yeah, for sure. Well, Kyle, hopefully that was helpful. Sounds like it was. Thanks for calling in tonight. Really.